Have you ever looked at a map of Toronto and wondered why Dundas Street is so wonky? Last year, I did a video on the architect E.J. Lennox. There's a magic link up here, and I'll put a link down in the description so you can find it when you finish watching this video. In the comments to that video, somebody suggested I should do a video about Dundas Street. And in my video about disappearances in Toronto, links in the usual places, I did briefly mention the weird course of Dundas Street when I was talking about jogs in Richmond and Adelaide. So, let's do a video about Dundas Street. But first, what this video is not about. This video is not about the controversy over Henry Dundas, his role in the end of the slave trade, and whether we should be renaming things that are named after him. It's about the street itself and why it looks like this. Most of the major streets in Toronto follow a grid pattern, but Dundas Street, not so much. Let's go back in time to find out why. This is Old Dundas Street, south of Dundas, on the west side of the Humber River. There's also Old Dundas over there on the other side of the river. These days, when a major road needs to cross a river valley, we typically build a viaduct so that it can continue on a reasonably straight and level path. But back in the day, roads used to meander down into the valley and cross the rivers on small bridges. I covered one of those in my video on the old Lawrence Avenue Bridge over the Don River, links in the usual places. In 1811, the road went down here and crossed on a bridge just behind me. In 1928, Dundas was rerouted onto a viaduct crossing the river, and this was renamed Old Dundas. The bridge remained in place until around the time of Hurricane Hazel. I did a video on Hurricane Hazel as well. You know where to find the links. There are lots of other old something or other streets in Toronto, including Old Yonge, Old Lawrence, and Old Leslie. But we're not at the start of the story of Dundas Street in Toronto yet either. For that, we need to go farther back in time. The story of Dundas Street goes back to the 1790s, in the part of today's city of Hamilton that was previously the town of Dundas. The town was actually named from the street, and not the other way around. Lieutenant Governor John Graves Simcoe ordered the construction of a military road west from that location to his preferred location for a capital city, London. A couple of years later, the road was extended east to somewhere around here, Bloor Street and Old Mill. Many parts of the course of that old road still carry one of two names, either Governor's Road, named after his position, or Dundas Street, named after his friend Henry Dundas. But of course, now this is Bloor Street. The origins of today's Dundas Street in the city of Toronto come a few years later. I'm walking north on Ossington Avenue, just north of Queen Street. Now, the more astute among you may have recognized that neither one of those is Dundas Street. So why am I here? Well, when this road was first constructed around the time of the War of 1812, this was Dundas Street. Here's a map of that original street. Now, it takes a weird course, but you have to remember at the time, this was well outside the city, so it probably followed the contours of the land and maybe even dropped by a few villages along the way. Compared to that, the rest of the route of Dundas Street looks pretty straight when you look at it at the city level, but when you zoom in, not so much. To talk about that, meet me up at the next intersection at Dundas and Ossington. And this is where Dundas Street, running north from Queen, originally turned west. Ossington Street started at this intersection running north. The fact that there's a bend in the road is a clue that these were not originally the same street on both sides. The section running east from here used to be Arthur Street. Here it is on a 1916 map with the original course of Dundas Street highlighted. This map will be out of date within a few years thanks to the kickoff of a project to join a whole bunch of streets together to form Dundas Street after the Second World War. But we'll be coming back to this map a bunch of times throughout this trip. Now, bends in the street like that are good clues that what you're looking at used to be two different streets, and there are a whole bunch of them on Dundas. So let's keep heading east and find the next one. Just east of Bathurst Street, Dundas takes a sharp jog to the south. As you can see on the map here, it's switching from the course of Arthur Street to St. Patrick Street. St. Patrick ran as far east as McCall, so that's where we'll head to next. East of McCall, Dundas Street continues along the alignment of what was formerly Anderson Street. There's a little jog here in the road crossing what today is St. Patrick. Now, two interesting things about that you can see on the map. One, it's not the same St. Patrick as before. It used to be called William. The name was recycled after the old St. Patrick disappeared under today's Dundas Street. The other one is that jog wasn't there in 1916. We'll talk about that at our next stop. And here at University Avenue, there's another jog because Anderson Street to the west didn't line up with the former Agnes Street to the east. Here's a map. Now, back to that jog that I had mentioned at St. Patrick. My suspicion is that that was put in place to make this jog a little bit smaller than it otherwise would have had to have been. Now, let's follow Agnes Street to its end at Yonge Street. This street is Dundas Square, running along the south side of Young Dundas Square. And as you can see on the map, Dundas Street takes a big jog to the south on the north side. That's because the alignment of this street here, which was Wilton Avenue, did not match up with Agnes on the other side. At the end of the block, Dundas continues along this same alignment. So let's continue east. Here at George Street, Dundas makes a crescent shape to the north before continuing on straight again beyond Sherburne. This was Wilton Crescent, which joined Wilton Avenue on the west with, well, Wilton Avenue on the east. Now the alignments don't quite line up, and I found a reference that says one part of Wilton used to be Crookshank. So my guess is that the section from Yonge to here was Crookshank, and then the section on the other side was Wilton. This bridge over the Don River, built in 1911, connected Wilton Avenue with Elliott Street, which was subsequently renamed Wilton. That name didn't last long because it was less than a decade before Dundas was extended to the east. There's a slight jog here, which probably means that Wilton and Elliott didn't quite line up. Until the 1950s, the end of the former Elliott Street, here at Bolton Avenue, was the end of Dundas Street. And as you can see in this 1954 picture, looking east on Dundas toward Broadview, the street narrowed as it crossed Broadview. That picture was taken not long before the project to extend Dundas to the east kicked off. However, unlike the city core, out here there wasn't a nearly continuous series of pre-existing streets that could just be renamed, widened if necessary, and stitched together with a few jogs. In fact, where I'm standing, just to the east of Bolton Avenue, didn't even used to be a street. Let's have a look at a map.
The approximate course of Dundas is shown in yellow, as on the previous maps. The leftmost marker is where I was just standing, a little bit east of Bolton, on a new section of road connecting Dundas to the former Whitby Street. At the next marker, where Dundas crosses the tracks, there's a bit of a bend in the road, and it looks like Dundas goes a bit south of the east end of Whitby Street, and then curves up towards Dickens Avenue. There's a small street today called Dickens Street, which I suspect follows the original course of Dickens Avenue itself. At the next marker, a gap between Carlaw and Pape Avenues was filled in with a new road to connect to Dagmar Avenue. You can see on the original map that there's a jog in Dagmar at our next marker. This disappeared because it didn't line up with the next street consumed by Dundas, Dole Avenue. Continuing east, Dundas follows the same route as Dole for a fair distance. There's a bend to the south near where Dundas crosses Greenwood Avenue, but that was the original course of Dole Avenue, and it links up with the next street that disappeared into Dundas, Applegrove Avenue. At our next marker, a new bend to the south approaching Coxwell Avenue was needed to link up with the next street, Ashbridge Avenue, which didn't quite line up with Applegrove. And then the last half a kilometer or so is a bit of a mess. Let's visit that spot and talk about it.
They say a picture is worth 1,000 words, so here are 2,000 words about the east end of Dundas Street. The 1916 map with an approximation of today's Dundas Street marked on it, and the current map. As you can see, several streets in the area were realigned, bits and pieces were stolen from each other, and right behind me, that's where Dundas Street ends at Kingston Road. Well, I hope you've enjoyed following the twists and turns of Dundas Street over the years. If you did, you know what to do. Please like and subscribe.